Welcome to Nakoto Building Arts, the podcast that highlights the brilliant minds behind the planning, design, and construction of cultural and performing arts facilities. While we often hear about the incredible art displayed in museums or the success of theater productions like Hamilton, it's the people behind the scenes, like today's guests, who create the spaces that allow these works to thrive. Join me now for this episode of Nakoto Building Arts. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Nakoto Building Arts. I'm your host, Nakoto, and today I'm thrilled to welcome a fantastic guest to the podcast, Adam Shalleck. Adam is the founder and president of the Shalleck Collaborative, a leader in the planning and design of performance spaces and cultural venues. Adam and his team have worked on over 300 projects of all scales and types of performing and media arts, including spaces like the San Francisco Conservatory of Music's Bowles Center, the Van Cliburn Concert Hall at Texas Christian University, the Shanghai International Dance Center, and the Portland 5 Arlene Schnitzer Concert Hall. His expertise in adaptive reuse and renovation plays a crucial role in preserving the past while embracing the future of performance spaces, which we hope to hear more about in our conversation today. It gives me great pleasure to have Adam Shalleck on the podcast today. Adam, how are you?
I'm really, really good. Thank you for having me. And more generally, thanks for doing this, for sort of going around recording people's histories in this niche world. It's really interesting.
Yeah, you all are the bright minds and the brilliant minds behind all of these buildings. And so I love to hear more about the people that design and plan and make these buildings happen. So
Yeah.
I always say a lot about we see a lot about the plays and the shows and the performances, but the people like yourself make these buildings happen. So I appreciate you coming on board with me today.
Indeed. Yeah.
So we'll jump right into it. I know you have a very busy schedule out there, and you're in California, all right? San
That's
Francisco.
right.
Okay, yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm on the other side in Florida, but so let's jump right into it. Can you tell us about your journey into theater planning? I always like to hear about how people got into this niche business. So how did you get into this?
Yeah. It was very early and very linear. I've always been sort of waiting for the other shoe to drop because everything just led to the next thing that led to the next thing. It connected a bunch of dots. I was privileged to have a really wonderful social studies teacher in seventh grade who was a sort of many things. First thing he did in the first day of class is he took the state curriculum textbook and he walked over to the window and he threw it out the window as a demonstration. He said, "We're just not going to do it that way this year." He was a self-appointed and self-studied local historian. This is in Ossining, New York, which is in Westchester County, first county north of New York City.
Sure.
And he split the year into two parts. The first half of the year was on law, and that led up to a mock trial. And the second half of the year was on architecture. And he
Hmm.
talked about architecture, not the profession. He talked at it basically by looking at the buildings right where we could see them, right in our area, having walks on Saturdays along the aqueduct and pointing things out. And what struck me was how the cultures of the times influenced the buildings and vice versa. And of course, I didn't know what the profession was anything about, but I knew I liked that idea
Mhm.
to really be involved with these sort of permanent reflections of culture. And then things led to things. I went up through high school and started separately and entirely differently working in technical theater backstage. Absolutely loved it. It was fun. It was cool. Got to wear black and headsets. And those two things were just two separate things. I was involved with music. We had great music programs, mostly in for me in jazz. And then I got a fellowship to travel to Japan for what would have been my senior year, and that sort of stripped away everything that I had ever known because it was not only language differences, but an entirely different way to look at things. This is pre-internet,
Mhm.
far, far away place. So it was
Right, right.
incredibly beautiful and mind-blowing and gave me a lot of time to think because I went to a regular high school and didn't understand a word they said.
Hmm.
Um, but from there, applied to some architecture programs, and with envelopes with lots of stamps coming from Japan. That was kind of an easy in. Found myself at a program that was really, really, really speaking to me down at Virginia Tech,
Mm.
which is a very independently driven, Bauhaus-oriented design program, fundamentals of design. And that was incredibly eye-opening coming from a year in Japan and going to school. Um, and then there too, in college, I was working in technical theater because it was cool, because it
Mm.
was fun working the shows that came through locally and on campus. And I got a little antsy there in Blacksburg, New York boy. I got a little antsy, and they had an option to go and work fourth year. It was a 5-year professional program. They got an option to work fourth year, and so I was particularly interested in going to chase after a wonderful firm by a husband and wife alum of the program, and they were in San Francisco. I had never been to San Francisco, but I saw their work, and I thought I really want to work for those folks. And I made an appointment for over spring break to fly across the country. And before then, of course, I thought, well, I'm not going to fly all the way over there and not talk to others. So I went to the architectural library. There was a reference shelf of old yellow pages from around the country. I pulled the San Francisco yellow pages, beat
Oh,
up
yellow
with
page.
gold.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I'm dating things as I go here.
Yeah.
So I'm looking at art, and again, pre-internet, if you weren't published in a magazine, there was
Right.
no way to know you, right?
Right.
So 3,000 miles away, I looked at architects. There was, an eighth of an inch thick of listings that I had no, other than the big ones, had no way to know what those different firms were about. Made some appointments with those that I had recognized. But then that same day, I don't know why, to this day, I turned in that yellow pages to theater. And there was all the Yellow Pages listings, theater rentals and theater cinema and theater makeup, theater costumes. And there was one heading that had one listing, undoubtedly put there by that company, that said theater consulting. And I didn't know what that meant, but it was, back in the exploratory days. So I took my pocket full of quarters over to the payphone and dialed them up and said, I'm an architecture student and work like technical theater. What is theater consulting? And the nice person that answered the phone dropped everything and explained it to me. That was sort of planning and design of spaces and these technical systems. It's a little bit of engineering. It's a lot of art. It's a lot of craft. Much of these things. I said, wow, that's really. Can I come talk to you? Sure. Okay, so I go out to San Francisco on that spring break. I sit down with that firm, that original firm that I was chasing after.
Mhm.
They remain good friends of mine to this day,
Mhm.
but it was a terrible interview on my part. So that wasn't going to work out. I went to the other big firms. They were just looking for model shop labor. They weren't all that inspiring. And I sat down with Len Auerbach. Then the firm was called S. Leonard Auerbach and Associates. And this is 1989. So contextually, that's a time in the US where the building boom of performing arts had really started taking off, right? From mid 80s on.
Mhm.
So many of the firms, and certainly that one, were really starting to take off. And a lot of interesting things were happening. And to make what turned out to be a long interview, a short story, it was a really electric discussion. And as things went on, as I opened another project and talked about how I was thinking about them with relationship to how light influenced design, and he fricked up and went from this position to this position and started calling people in. Things led to things. He offered me the internship. It was an incredible time of the year there. And then that formulated my thesis when I would go back to school and do a fifth year thesis program on theater design. And then that all study seemed to make sense that when I applied for a traveling fellowship um, to go to Europe and look at theaters, because this is what I was going to do, the traveling fellowship came around. So I was all set to finish school and go to Europe on this fellowship and travel around and look at theaters. And Then in my apartment, the phone rang, and it was Bob Wolf, the president of Artec Theater Consultants. And I'm, eating peanut butter and Oreo cookies, and I'm getting a call from New York City. And one of his employees lived in Ossining, New York, and he said, this guy, this is Bob Essert, acoustical consultant, never reads the local paper, but read it that day, and certainly doesn't turn to the back and look at the little announcements. My mother once had, just proud of her boy, had put a little announcement sort of describing this little bio. My son did this, and then he did this, and he's gonna go to Europe, and Bob Essert cut it out and gave it to Bob Wolf, and Bob Wolf called me, and he said, you should come and talk to us. So I spent a summer as an intern at Artec, sort of retesting if I wanted to settle back in New York.
Mhm.
And that was a time at Artec where basically a lot of the second generation of theater consultants were working in it, and acoustics consultants, excuse me.
Mhm.
So that was a great time. Then I did go to Europe, and
Mhm.
then I ended up going back to the Auerbach organization in 1990, where I would go from mailroom to principal for the course of the next 14 years.
Wow.
And
Wow.
21 years ago, spun off and started the Shalleck Collaborative.
So with your that was awesome background. So you never actually worked for an architect, so you went straight into theater out of architecture school.
Yeah, so that was the really great thing about it, is that sort of in that example of, if you work for an architect, you're gonna see that architect's
Hmm.
right. Well, things were taking off, and so here I was in an internship, and we had projects from all of the leading architects, and I was able to sit in conference rooms and review drawings and
Right.
provide sketches with 10 of these guys at the same time, and not be in their back room building a model. It was actually more exposure to a really wide array than working in one or two. So long story
Mhm.
short, yes, I did, however, get licensed along the way.
Okay.
All of those architects signed my paperwork because I was working for them one step
Yes.
removed. And yeah, so that's right.
Now, did you all in theater? You were architect, and Freelander. Did you do both sides of it as far as theater design and planning and the acoustics, or how did
Yeah,
that
good question. So I've never practiced in acoustics at
mm,
all. I've really been focused on theater planning,
theater planning
and
side?
when the way that the Auerbach office ran was that everyone really got to touch all the parts of theater consulting, which I really enjoyed: technical, management,
Yeah.
planning,
Mm,
design, coordination, all the different sides, not siloed.
mm.
Um, and my music part says that I am the acoustician's biggest advocate, but I am not one. So
Gotcha.
I love advocating and working toward the great acoustic sides of things, and have a
Mhm.
deep appreciation for it. But I don't even play one on TV.
So you alluded to it, and so in 2003, 21 years ago, you
Yeah.
started the Shalleck Collaborative. Now, what inspired you to branch out on your own?
Part of that was an ambition to carry a bigger umbrella,
Mm,
and to layer on the business and practice sides to the daily sides of consulting. And that's exactly what it is and what it takes, and what it meant. And there was in '03, so that was, again, going back to economic context. That was yet another ramp up. So the dot-com bubble had burst,
right.
but we were now climbing up into the '05, '03, '05, '06 run up of a whole lot of activity right from the start. So there was plenty of work to go around.
Yeah, yeah, that's awesome. Awesome. Congratulations to 21 years. I was reading a statistic of, I think 90% of businesses, startups go out of business after 10 years, I guess. But 21 years,
One,
congratulations.
thank you.
Congratulations.
Not a if you link all the things you really care about doing, it doesn't feel like work.
Awesome. Awesome.
Right?
And Shalleck Collaborative. You named your company Collaborative. What does the process of collaboration look like at your company, and how do you foster creativity within your team?
Yeah, so I meant it to be um, referencing both in how we operate internally, but mostly externally, right? So, these you are part of, the incredible village that puts these things together. And going back again to that idea of carrying a bigger umbrella, the more things you really dive into, even if not in expertise, but the more you bring in, the better a collaborator you are with those other disciplines. So that's part of it is making sure that everyone is learning everyone else's disciplines outside of our group as opposed in addition to inside of our group. And then internally, we have a wonderful, wonderful group of people, mostly from technical theater and theater design areas and all those sides, and a couple of architects. And um, everyone has even those more nuanced sides, the lighting oriented person that we're exposing to this, and the sound oriented people that we're exposing to that, forcing a lot of that broadening of everybody's interest areas, even though they may sort of more be in one lane. We want people to get out of their lane a little
Yeah,
bit, so that again, it's an ever
rounded.
increasing time and career. Yeah,
That's kind of how we are in the cost consulting.
oh
Sometimes
yeah.
people can get pigeonholed in measuring the partitions or measuring structure. We need to see the whole picture and the whole building. So I get that.
You guys have to know all the things. And
Yes,
then and particularly in your practice, you're getting involved when there's nothing on the page. So now you have
exactly.
to get inside of these brains.
Yeah,
Whoa.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
We
Yeah.
try to do our trainings all the time so we can see the picture before anything is drawn. So yeah, so that's I understand. So let's get a little bit into the design, the theater design. So your firm worked closely with many performing arts organizations and artists. How do you ensure that their creative vision is reflected in your planning and designs?
So we I see us as the hands of the client in some ways. Whether they there's a couple of sides to this. And it comes to drawing out in that very open and humble and collaborative way all of the influences that are coming from the client side in whatever way that they want to express them. So you'll hear, high level, we aim to be in this area of the arts. We want to move to this area in the arts too. I need a sync right here, and everything in between, and we're collecting all those influences because there is no such thing as a blank slate when it comes
Mhm.
to projects. There's
Mhm.
so many facets to everything. There's a huge amount of collection and discovery of searching that happens at the beginning, and then from project to project, even from moment to moment, from a consultant standpoint, there's a choice that we have to that we make, which is this a moment where we need to be leading the process? Or is this a moment where we need to be serving, bolstering, inspiring, sparking, but not leading the process? And honestly, what I try to tell our folks is the real trick is to know which to do when and how
Mhm.
to balance them. And those dynamics change from two disciplines talking together, 10 disciplines talking together, four aspects of the clients. And a lot of times what I like to make sure we're doing with the client at the beginning, and this both the architects who are at the top of the pyramid,
Mhm.
and on the client side, is to really ask them how they would like us to work. How are we best going to support to get you where you need to go? If they say, you're the professional, you tell us, great, we can absolutely enjoy doing that, checking in with if it feels right for them. Sometimes it's said, but it's not meant. Um,
Yeah, yeah.
or in other cases, and I love this equally as much, if a client knows exactly what they want, how they operate,
Hmm.
then absolutely we're going to start and we're going to check, and then they're going to think, oh, but we want to change the way we operate like this. Great, let's pivot, let's do this. And that to me is equally as captivating as bringing the ideas to the table in the first place.
Yeah, yeah,
The
definitely.
time.
So your theater planning and design, what are some unique challenges and opportunities that come with planning and designing these performance spaces that you work on? Some challenges or
That is a awesome and gigantic question, Nakoto. Thank you. We are going to try to keep this try to keep this managed, and
I guess you'll share some more too later on. I'll ask you about specific projects that you can share.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I think that I'm going to answer in the way that what are we facing now,
Hmm.
which I think is I'm what is it 35 years in, and I've seen lots of interesting cycles, and I'm most interested in the next one, whatever that is. Where are we going to? We
Right.
know what we've come from. Let's see where we're going to. And I would say there's an overarching post-pandemic recovery, extraordinary financial strain, top to bottom in all the ways. And how does that come up in challenges both on the soft side, how are organizations figuring out how to do as much or more with less, and then on the building side, same thing. How do we what can we do with the budgets and the figures that we have, and strategize it, and work with all the team members to inspire the best outcome for a given budget. And we're happy to work at little budgets and big budgets. We
Hmm.
we don't think more budget is not necessarily better in what we're striving for. We're
Hmm.
striving for the right hit, and it's not just the right hit of today in the building. It's the right hit of the programs that the client's users want to do with them over time. So it's not just by any stretch a lovely building is only the start for the client. The client's going to live there and needs to thrive in it.
Now, you're hired on most of the time, what, before the architect, right? And then the architect comes on board, or what's that balance?
Yeah. It can go both ways too.
Yeah, yeah.
Sometimes, in fact, yes, we're helping the ultimate client define, refine, make the narrative of what they seek, so that they're in the best situation to then ask for full design services,
Hmm.
um, which is how I look at getting there before the rest of the team.
Hmm.
Um, Sometimes we come in with the team at the same time as everyone's coming in. Occasionally, and my least favorite, is coming in after something's already been theoretically sorted, and we're just seen as sort of the paint on the wall. Here, paint some theater consulting on there.
Right,
And
right.
that is a very tricky spot for us to be in, because sometimes that initial concept is hard to work in. So hopefully, we search and encourage that we're there to, again, not put my thumbprint on it, but just to make sure that
Mm.
it's going to work the best it can for the outcome of the arts.
Yeah, yeah. So, like I said in the beginning, over 300 projects that you,
Yeah, that's an old number. I think I stopped counting at 300. So
okay.
so
That's the
now we just
website
say
number.
hundreds and hundreds. Yeah, hundreds and hundreds. Yeah,
Hundreds and hundreds of
yeah.
projects. Can you share, I guess, a couple of projects or one project that stands out to you in terms of impact on the community or the arts?
I do.
Sure.
I'm going to share a couple of images of one that came
Okay.
to mind when you asked me to sort of think about this in advance. And I chose this because it really does get to that idea that both buildings and owners and clients and programs evolve over time.
Mhm.
These things are not momentary by any stretch. So toward the I'm sharing all right. Yeah.
Yes,
Um,
San Francisco.
yeah. In the last few years, when I was with Auerbach, we worked on moving the San Francisco Conservatory of Music from their humble start place out in what's called the Avenues of San Francisco. They were in an old orphanage for their first 70 years. Um, and we helped find them a place in the Civic Center adjacent to the symphony and the opera and City Hall in two parcels that were adjacent and being sold together. One that was not seismically worthwhile, so that was going to get torn down. The second had a beautiful facade and this sort of Fabergé egg of a ballroom. And it wasn't even initially thought that we would preserve this. We thought we'd just prop up the facade and then build the building behind it.
Okay, yeah.
But then an idea was thrown out there that, hey, maybe the old ballroom should be the auditorium side of the concert hall. And this is about a half a flight up from grade. And this program was such that it was going to take, and it took extraordinary measures to hold up this room that was set back from the facade, to dig out all around it, including below it, holding this thing up in the air, put 3 floors below it and hang 3 floors above it, and then blow through the end. What you're seeing here on the proscenium is actually opening a wall up to the new parcel. The new parcel was where the stage is. So the architectural difference that you're seeing to the stage is representative of the fact that these are 2 parcels and the room is reaching through the parcels. So at the time, here's why other interesting things about it. When we did this, it was a very traditional classical music conservatory, and even the opera program said, we don't want you to design our big music space to accommodate opera because it will dilute the pure concert hall side of things once you start adding all the things that you need to support opera. So we're going to keep performing offsite 1 or 2 performances a year. Okay, great. But we sort of knew in the back of our mind, yeah, all rooms need a range. So in that stage was infrastructure for other things that could happen, to get suspended and wired in, that sort of thing. Flash forward, the conservatory had been open for a whole bunch of years. We did the Shalleck Collaborative. We did the new facility with their new president, the then new president, who had some more curricular ambitions and added technology programs and jazz program. And they had been, because he really liked to just keep everything at this address, they had been cramming in opera and musical theater into this theater at great expense. It wasn't built for it, but they were doing it, and it was painful for them because it bollocksed, 3 weeks of load-in time, which was taking the theater offline. So I was able to come back around after we did the new facility with them, and take advantage of the infrastructure that we had put in there 20 years ago, and help them with a technical rig to get them moving toward the cumbersome scenic approaches that they were doing, and give them an immersive tool that they can do very, very impactful musical theater and opera with far less scenery, and both in terms of cost, calendar time, and obviously immersive is very, 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 very impactful. And they're just starting to experiment on how things go in that regard. So watching a singular building start originally as a YMCA, and then become a music conservatory and a classical view, and then start to infuse technology into this beautiful historic thing is really an interesting journey for this project.
Yeah, that's nice. Wow, immersive technology there. Now, did you design the immersive technology portion of it as well, or
the gear, yes. The gear, yes. The content, no.
Okay.
Yeah. And I knew where all the infrastructure was. And I would crawl through the attic with
Right.
them, and they, oh, we didn't even know this was here. Like, well, I put this here 20 years ago, and look, we're going to use this thing. Yeah,
Wow.
it's pretty great.
Well, that's
Yeah.
yeah. That kind of leads me into my next question and
Hmm.
adaptive reuse and renovation of historic spaces and historic theaters. Here's so
Yeah.
much about it and the challenges of it, and worked on several too. But just wanted to hear from your perspective. Can you share a project or where you had where was it adaptive reuse and renovation project?
Yeah. Um, I'm going to go to another one in San Francisco, if that's all right.
Yes.
Yeah. Let's get me sharing again. And so here, yeah. So this theater came to us in relatively bad shape.
Yes.
As around the country, and it's all very it's really interesting to not only study my era of what's happened in these decades, but how theaters evolved and re-evolved over
Hmm.
time. Obviously, before television, there were thousands and thousands of cinemas, and most of them were torn down. A lot of them had no actual architectural or spatial merit much at all, but they still had a beautiful blade sign and occupied a
Right.
space in people's memories. So American Conservatory Theater, which is our big drama company in San Francisco, regional theater company in San Francisco, has been operating their large venue at Geary. And it was time for them to have a second small less expensive to run, more agile, nimble, hipper place to start expanding their offerings.
Mhm.
And so they bought the Strand Theater on Market Street, which was at that point sort of nicely situated next to the emerging tech blocks that were developing at mid-market. Um, I'm going back a few years because things have changed since then, but
Mhm.
again, context of the time. And one could say, well, you made a theater into a theater. Well, it was a terrible, terrible, terrible cinema. It had a lovely blade sign, it had a great address. But the theater designers who are looking at this will see this cigar of a room and groan, 37 feet wide, 1 million feet long. It wasn't even a good cinema at the time. In looking at it in section, a gazillion people underneath the terrible overhang, the world's largest. I mean, they just crammed as
Yeah.
many seats
Yeah.
into as much as they could. Tiny, tiny, tiny little vaudeville stage. So we wanted to make this, the ACT was set out to make a few other program elements. We worked with the behemoth firm of SOM, who's known for doing entire cities and giant buildings. And here was this tiny project right in their backyard. They wrapped their arms around it with a freshness that was really invigorating. And we inserted, here's the adaptation part. We basically inserted a playhouse into this shell, brought the stage into the room to make a proper stage, dug more of the basement for support, 280 seat single balcony lovely little playhouse, a core of
Mhm.
services and circulation, a right-sized lobby, and a rehearsal and meeting and event space overhead. And so like I said, it's about as adapting as it gets. It wasn't a different kind of building,
Mhm.
but sorry, a shell. It wasn't a factory. It wasn't a
Mhm.
firehouse, but it wasn't anything like this. The lobby was rendered both to let some of that messy stuff show
Mhm.
through,
Mhm.
look forward, big LED wall, the room itself.
Oh.
And then the other interesting thing here that sprung off of sort of a line of series of projects at the time. So this is 15. We'd already finished a few other projects thinking about this idea that should we really be building taut, tight rows of seats for the emerging audiences? And we put out there that the artistic director, Carrie Perloff, had been writing about how she was really going to try to get the new young tech audiences into theater or bring theater to them.
Mhm.
And the first thing I thought was, well, it may be that those guys don't want to have to be ushered into tight rows and be told to be quiet and be trapped in their seats during a performance. And maybe they might want an arrangement that
Oh, nice.
was casual, that would tell the brain, it's cool to be here. I can
Hmm.
get up if I want to. And yet that transformability, there's a lot of discussion. You've been involved with a lot of transformable rooms, can be both very, very expensive, very cumbersome. So we've coming from my background, we're very careful with our ways that we talk about transformable architecture. And without going into too much detail, we did this with very, very simple means to really minimize how much time it would take to go from one setting to the next. And we didn't force this on them. We sort of put it
Hmm.
out there and tested it, and they were ultimately quite drawn to it. And that's taught us a lot of things about really how to re-examine where we should be going now post-pandemic and new audiences. Again, it's a continued question. And then that beautiful rehearsal room, small performance space up over the lobby.
That's
So
all within the structure of that existing
within,
building.
yeah, that
Wow.
ridiculous cigar that we
Yeah.
started. Yeah, exactly right. We didn't uh,
Nice.
we didn't go out at is that true? We filled in one of the light wells
Mhm.
on one side of the room, on one side of the building. Yeah.
Were the spans reasonable, or did you have to create more structure, strengthen the structure to create open lobby spaces or anything like that?
Fortunately, one of the many things that SOM brings to the table is those heroics are no big deal. So
Yeah.
yes, there was interesting structural needs, mostly not only for span, the span's only 40 feet wide,
Hmm.
but trying to try to do those spans
Hmm.
in really thin pieces
Yeah.
and carefully placed approaches. Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. So with historical building, now that project, there wasn't a historical on a historical registry and so forth like that, or was it?
It aspects of it were.
Hmm.
Certainly the facade. There are some references in the lobby that are a little bit hard to see, that are doing that were sort of negotiated with the planning department about just what things were going to be there. But it wasn't the inside, the historic fabric really didn't exist in the auditorium itself. So there was no love lost in the auditorium.
Yeah, yeah. So with your experience with working on these projects, what type of advice would you give other architects or theater planners on on a project like this in terms of challenges to anticipate?
Mm. Well, I certainly envy them. I envy those who have not done it yet, because they are on a voyage of new discovery. Um, and there's that word again, the discovery process.
Mhm.
That's the advice. You have to see what the building gives you. Um, you have to see what the aspirations and ambitions of the client and their funders, um, how far they want to go with things, because obviously you've seen them all. You've presented the many on your series. There's extraordinary heroicism, and then there's very light touch approaches, and both of them are absolutely right, depending upon if they are the answer to the challenges at hand. So it's really being open to what those facets give you. And also, what I like to make sure we're also doing is where are we in that client's evolution? And um, is this the last? This is probably not the last thing that they're going to do. How do we set them up to take one step forward, knowing that there's eventually perhaps going to be another step down the road? We don't have to solve all the things for the incredible eventuality for till the end of time. We want to move them as far forward as all of those facets will allow. Yeah.
That's great. A couple of final questions.
Yeah.
Thank you for your time too. What emerging trends in theater design that excite you the most right now? I think you mentioned something about immersion, but what other emerging trends you that
Yeah, uh, a few sides of this. One is, it is sort of like when people ask me what my favorite project is, I say
you?
it, it's the next one. That's
Of course.
the next one. And that I'm not in a pitch standpoint. And what I mean by that is there's always we're always going somewhere.
Right.
And uh, what has emerged. What struck me when we opened a project in LA called the Nimoy Theater, and I was having a conversation with a very wise executive director who had, and this is toward the end of the pandemic, who had sort of realized that he wasn't necessarily going to chase after his old audiences. He was going to develop new. He was going to put all his energy into finding the new audiences, and the prior audiences would come back or they wouldn't. It was the new audiences that he was most interested in. And where those are is going to vary wildly from context to context. And understanding, discovering what that context is that's the thing. That is the thing. It's exciting. It's interesting. It's variable. And as I travel around the states, even in a singular week, and see the different attitudes about what's next, it's
Mhm.
wonderful and fascinating. Yeah.
Awesome, awesome.
Yeah.
Uh, I often speak to younger people in college career and high school.
Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone that may want to become a theater planner, designer?
So, um, uh, primarily to, and this is just my take, connect as many dots in your interest areas as you possibly can. And some of them might not be theater, but they will get to the fundamental question that gets re-asked, which is how we gather, how we should be gathering. And you can connect so many different interest areas and point them to and pick from that interest area and insert it into a career toward this or for any other thing. So, I plugged in architecture, obviously, and technical theater and music, an interest in music and improvisation and knowing what flow feels like, finance, engineering, sailing, believe it or not, has
Mm.
two things that that show up in practice and practice leadership. So not to be too concerned about only doing something that you think is going to be in there.
Mhm.
Do the passion things and then glue them together, and you'll find yourself having an interesting life.
Awesome, awesome. Uh, so that's the advice you give. What's the best piece of advice that you've received in your career?
Yeah, couple of things stand out. One is a quote that I'm going to attribute to who quoted to me, but he was quoting someone else. But and it seems so fundamental that 90% of life is showing up. Um, the other was an observation, not really a career out two. The next two are not really career observations, but they were applicable. One is that if you feel stuck, just go ahead and turn everything upside down and relook at things. Change scales.
Yeah.
Um, and the other, and Nakoto, I don't know if your podcast has beeps or not, but coming from the famous architect, late architect Charles Gwathmey, when I was working on a project, he simply said, "Don't." And I took that to be something that I really should keep in mind every day, all the time, and apply it all the places. So,
I'm sure that never left your mind there.
yep. Thanks, Charles.
So that's a great piece of advice.
Sometimes they're really simple, don't
Yeah.
be a jerk.
Keep it simple, stupid. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this last two questions really here. So what's
Sure.
next up for you? Any new projects, hiring staff, or speaking? Last time I saw you were at the IAVM
That's
up
right.
in Portland. So that was great. Day at the theater. So that was awesome.
Day at the theater, yeah, way to get the performing arts sector together and
Hmm.
reconnect this incredibly
Yeah.
community that, in essence, in that context, is not competitive, and so they are incredible.
Hmm.
They are able to be incredibly sharing and open about all the things they learn, all the things they do
Right.
toward the same end. Um, we've started work on another project. We have a lovely series of projects in Utah, and we're doing another one for Salt Lake County
Oh,
as they expand what their performing arts offerings are. Downtown is nearly done, and we've been doing their mid-sized projects elsewhere. So we're starting another one there. And then a short stack of studies, which has become quite an interest, and I think what I can bring a lot to is answering these questions that we've been talking about.
right.
Where should this building go next? Where for this organization? Should we look at this building? Should we look at a new building? Those are really interesting to me because of all the things we've been talking about. And then another in a series of long implementations for a project that was conceived by Frank Lloyd Wright in Marin, called the Marin's Veterans Memorial Auditorium. And not only are the solutions the thing, but the implementation strategies are also um, really important to work through, particularly in these organizations that are really busy. And you got to figure out how we can do something when they can't shut down, or they are shut down, but for a particular period of time. And so um, that's what's
Awesome.
keeping me busy.
Yeah, yeah. I really appreciate it. So last question is, how can our viewers get in contact with you? This.
It's super, super simple. So the Shalleck Collaborative, Shalleck, is also our domain. So www.shalleck.com. Fair amount of social places you can find that. I am also known as info@shalleck.com or adam@shalleck.com. Either one gets to me,
Okay, I'll put that information
and our
down.
team. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
I definitely appreciate it, Adam. Thank you for your time. It's been a long time coming, and I'm glad
Hey,
to have you on the podcast. So I appreciate it.
really a pleasure. And again, thank you so much for doing this. Having a record of what's on everybody's mind at this time is really valuable. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. If you've enjoyed this video and would like to see others like it, please visit my YouTube channel at Nakoto Building Arts. And while you're there, remember to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.